It is widely understood today that the current political and social issues of our day regularly challenge the personal integrity of individuals. These include abortion, homosexuality, gun rights, taxes, and many, many more. Each issue should be viewed through the lens of truth, but sadly, most people do not agree on what truth actually is. So, we evaluate current issues through our own personal worldviews. This presentation will seek to address the complicated division behind the question of wealth redistribution. This is an issue of personal integrity. Is it ethically permissible to take money from the wealthy and give it to the poor? This question could be asked in a couple of other ways. Is it morally acceptable to take from those with plenty to give it to those in need? Or, do we allow the wealthy to enjoy the benefits of their labor without having to share? When the issue of wealth redistribution is brought up, oftentimes the common man's heroic Robin Hood is where our minds will drift. But what happens when the weaseling third-party bandit becomes an authoritative, coercive government? We will begin looking at this issue through the Christian worldview. Oftentimes, Christians are split on ethical issues of taxes and money. The argument for why it is ethically permissible to take from the rich and give to the poor would argue that Christians have a moral obligation to give, and they see the government as a conduit to do so. Christians are called to give and are expected to share what they have with those who are needy. Quoting from Scripture, Deuteronomy 16:17 says that every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God which he has given you. Also, Galatians 6:9 says that, and let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. Christians often claim these two verses as reasoning for why giving is necessary and is an obligation. They see government taxes as a way of doing their part to give to the common good. In 2016, there have been a lot of discussions about the ethical economic restructuring of taxes and the wealth gap between the rich and the poor. The wealth gap between the rich and the poor is steadily growing, and the middle class has nearly diminished. The Democratic Party has a lot to say about what the economic restructure should be. They believe that the top percent, especially the top 1% of people, should be required to contribute slightly more than the common citizens through their taxes. Now we will move on to why it is not ethically permissible to take from the rich and give to the poor through the lens of Christianity. In the government of ancient Israel, each person paid the same percentage, a 10% tithe. Those who worked had more income, but they paid the same percentage of their total income as those who did not work as much or make as much. They held the view that God is fair and treats both the rich and the poor equally and fairly. Now, we realize that no matter which side of the issue you side with through the Christian perspective, that not everyone is looking through the worldview of Christianity. So we will address the ethics of this issue through the lens of naturalism. Naturalism is a substantial worldview among scientists and atheists. This worldview maintains that the world randomly came into existence and that the physical world is all there is to life in the universe. They hold the view that the world and everything in it is just as it should be, and that humans should not mess with the natural order of things. The survival of the fittest determines who succeeds and who fails, who lives and who dies, who's rich and who is poor. Additionally, because they hold the view that this life is all there is, each individual should live their own way and live to the fullest to get the most out of life that they can. This does not leave much room for assisting others or having a general concern for the poor or those who are less fortunate. Naturalists would contend that for this ethical dilemma, taking from the rich to give to the poor is just a foolish waste of time. Not only would doing so artificially impact the natural social structure of the land, but it would also consequently affect the physical and longevity of the weakest of the population, therefore offsetting the natural balance and distribution for the survival of the fittest. Naturalists would certainly claim that this is a much larger ethical issue than helping the poor. Now we move on to address the collective views of our group. Each of us in the group have had a personal experience of giving money to charity or to the homeless, although never by force and only rarely by moral obligation. Also within the group, we have had some family experiences that included debating government-funded supplements, such as food stamps, that some of our relatives have started receiving. Of course, the social network we have, including our families and friends, will generally support and coordinate with the type of worldview that we have ourselves. We will often have similar political and moral beliefs as our families and friends, and we believe oftentimes what we do because of what our parents believe and have taught us. Also, attending a Southern Baptist college, Anderson University, we have a lot of the same views as our peer group. Being from the South, the Republican taxation view is very dominant. This view holds that income or wealth should not be determined by how much you have to contribute. This goes back to the Hebrew Christian government structure. Above all, however, I believe that we would each claim that our spiritual ethics and our faith influences are what shape our worldview the most. Christians are called to give, to be a blessing to others. Giving is encouraged in our churches and by our spiritual leaders, but is not forced. Our spiritual beliefs, what we see as truth, are most certainly at the forefront of what shapes our mindsets and our social morale. In regards to the theoretical approaches of ethical decision-making, the deontological approach would hold that Christians do have a moral obligation to give, and that the government has a moral obligation to provide for the people. The teleological approach would hold that the government has a goal to provide for the people, and that to do so, they need to get the most possible out of the people who have the most for the good of the public. Ultimately, as we have looked into this topic and the ethical standpoints, we have collectively agreed as a group that it is ethically permissible for a government to take slightly more from the wealthy, specifically the top 1%, than from the bottom 10%. This conclusion does, however, come with restrictions and regulations. Specifically, this should occur through taxes that are going to be put into infrastructure and education or other things for the public good. The money should not be taken from the wealthy and given to specific individuals. We would, however, still contend that it is not morally permissible to take money from the rich and give it to the poor. No one has a moral obligation or a duty to take what is not theirs and do with it what they think should be done. We do apologize to those who love Robin Hood. The hero should be locked up.